In the quiet suburban neighborhood where I spent my childhood, my parents, seasoned realtors and skilled house flippers, often enlisted my help in their renovation projects. From the tender age of 12, I became an eager apprentice, assisting with tasks like cleaning, painting, and organizing. It was during one of these seemingly innocuous home improvement endeavors that I stumbled upon a chilling secret lurking beneath the surface of a seemingly ordinary property. The house in question was a modest two-story colonial that had fallen into disrepair. The walls were peeling, the carpets threadbare, and a musty smell permeated the air. My parents had purchased it at an auction, eager to restore it to its former glory. As I diligently scrubbed the kitchen tiles, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. The air seemed heavy with an unspoken tension, as if the house itself held secrets it was desperate to conceal. In one of the upstairs bedrooms, I noticed something peculiar. The closet doors were smeared with a strange substance that resembled dried feces. Children's handprints, smudged and faded, were imprinted on the surface, and there were faint scratches on the insides of the doors, as if tiny fingernails had desperately clawed at the wood. A cold shiver ran down my spine as I realized the horrifying implication. These marks were not the result of innocent childhood play, but rather the remnants of a cruel and disturbing past. Unable to contain my curiosity, I hesitantly approached my parents and inquired about my unsettling discovery. Their faces grew somber, as they shared a haunting tale that sent shivers down my spine. The previous tenants, a troubled couple with a history of substance abuse, had subjected their young children to unspeakable horrors. As punishment for misbehaving, they would lock the toddlers in the closets for days on end, leaving them alone in the darkness with nothing but their own terror for company. The children, desperate to escape their confinement, had clawed at the doors and smeared their excrement in a futile attempt to alert someone to their plight. The walls, once filled with the laughter and joy of young children, now bore witness to their silent suffering. I couldn't shake the image of those innocent victims trapped in the suffocating darkness, their cries for help echoing unheard through the empty house. As the days turned into nights, I found myself haunted by the house's tragic history. I couldn't sleep, tormented by nightmares in which the children's desperate scratching and whimpering reverberated through the corridors. The once mundane tasks of cleaning and painting took on a sinister new meaning, becoming a grim reminder of the horrors that had transpired within those walls. My parents, sensing my unease, tried their best to console me. They assured me that the house had been thoroughly cleaned and sanitized, and that the demons of the past had been exorcised. But despite their reassurances, I couldn't bring myself to fully shake the feeling that the house was still tainted by its dark history. Undeterred, my parents forged ahead with the renovations, determined to erase the physical manifestations of the house's troubled past. New paint covered the stained walls, fresh carpets replaced the threadbare ones, and the musty smell was replaced by a faint scent of lavender. Yet, despite their efforts, I couldn't escape the lingering sense of unease. As the house neared completion, my parents held an open house to showcase their handiwork. Potential buyers marveled at the transformation, praising the bright and airy spaces and the charming details. But for me, the house would forever be haunted by the shadows of its past. In the end, the house was sold to a young family with 2 small children. As I watched them move in, my heart filled with a mix of hope and trepidation. I hoped that they would never learn of the house's dark history, but I couldn't help but wonder if the ghosts of the past would ever truly be laid to rest. Years later, I returned to the neighborhood to visit my parents. As I drove past the house, I noticed that it had changed hands again. The new owners had painted it a cheerful yellow and added a swing set in the backyard. A young girl was playing on the swing, her laughter carried by the summer breeze. For a moment, I felt a pang of sadness as I thought of the children who had once suffered within those walls. But as I watched the young girl swing higher and higher, her laughter filling the air, I felt a sense of peace. Perhaps, with the passage of time and the love of a new family, the house's dark past could finally be redeemed. The small town of Willow Creek was known for its serene beauty and peaceful atmosphere. The townsfolk were friendly and welcoming, and the town itself was nestled in the heart of a dense forest. It was a place where people came to escape the hustle and bustle of city life, to find solace in nature's embrace. I, a young journalist named Alex, had come to Willow Creek to write a story about the town's unique charm. I had been living in the city for years, and the idea of spending a few weeks in a quiet, peaceful town was incredibly appealing. Upon my arrival, I was greeted by the town's mayor, a kind, elderly man named Mr. Thompson. He welcomed me with open arms and showed me to my temporary residence, a cozy cabin on the outskirts of town. As I settled into my new home, I couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. The cabin was old and creaky, and the surrounding forest seemed to be alive with an eerie, unspoken energy. I brushed off these feelings as the product of my overactive imagination and decided to explore the town. The next day, I ventured into the heart of Willow Creek. The town was quaint and picturesque, with charming shops and friendly locals. I spent the day interviewing the townsfolk and taking photographs of the beautiful scenery. As the sun began to set, I decided to head back to my cabin. On my way, I stumbled upon an old, abandoned house on the outskirts of town. The house was dilapidated and overgrown with vines, and it seemed to beckon me with a sinister allure. Curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to investigate the house. As I approached the front door, I noticed a strange symbol etched into the wood. It was a circle with a triangle inside, and it seemed to radiate an ominous energy. I pushed open the door and stepped inside. The house was dark and musty, with cobwebs hanging from the ceiling and dust covering every surface. As I made my way through the house, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. In the basement, I discovered a strange contraption that looked like a cross between a water sprinkler and a torture device. It was made of rusty metal and had a series of sharp blades attached to it. The device was connected to a large tank filled with a thick, red liquid. I realized with a start that the liquid was blood. I quickly left the house and returned to my cabin, my mind racing with questions. Who had built this strange device, and why? Was it connected to the town's history in some way? The next day, I decided to visit the town's library to research the history of Willow Creek. The librarian, a kind old woman named Mrs. Johnson, was more than happy to help me. As I pored over the town's archives, I discovered that Willow Creek had a dark past. In the early 1900s, a cult known as the Blood Sprinklers had taken root in the town. The cult was led by a charismatic man named Elijah, who claimed to have the power to control the forces of nature. The Blood Sprinklers believed that the key to unlocking this power lay in the blood of their victims. They would kidnap people from the town and bring them to the abandoned house, where they would be tortured and killed. Their blood would then be collected and used in a ritual to summon the forces of nature. The cult was eventually disbanded, and Elijah was arrested and imprisoned. However, the townspeople never spoke of the Blood Sprinklers again, as if they were trying to forget their dark past. As I continued my research, I discovered that the Blood Sprinklers had a specific ritual they performed on the night of the full moon. The ritual involved activating the strange device in the basement of the abandoned house, and using the blood to summon a powerful entity known as the Blood Demon. I realized with a sinking feeling that the next full moon was only a few days away. If the Blood Sprinklers were still active, they would perform the ritual and unleash the Blood Demon upon the town. I knew I had to warn the townsfolk, but I was afraid they wouldn't believe me. I decided to investigate the abandoned house once more, hoping to find evidence that the Blood Sprinklers were still active. As I approached the house, I noticed that the strange symbol on the front door had been replaced with a new one. It was a circle with a pentagram inside, and it seemed to be pulsating with an otherworldly energy. I pushed open the door and stepped inside, my heart pounding in my chest. The house was even more dilapidated than before, and the air was thick with the stench of decay. As I made my way to the basement, I heard a faint whispering coming from the shadows. I couldn't make out the words, but I could feel the malevolent energy emanating from the darkness. I reached the basement, and found the strange device still connected to the tank of blood. The tank was nearly empty, and I could see that the Blood Sprinklers had been preparing for the ritual. As I examined the device, I heard footsteps approaching from behind. I turned around and saw a group of men dressed in black robes, their faces hidden behind hoods. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice shaking with fear. "We are the blood sprinklers," one of the men replied, his voice deep and menacing. "And you have trespassed upon our sacred ritual." I tried to reason with them, to explain that I was a journalist and that I only wanted to warn the town. But they wouldn't listen, and they attacked me. I fought back with all my strength, but I was no match for the blood sprinklers. They overpowered me and dragged me to the basement, where they tied me to a chair in front of the strange device. As the full moon rose in the sky, the blood sprinklers began their ritual. They chanted in a language I didn't understand, and the air around me seemed to grow colder. I struggled against my bonds, but they were too tight. I could feel the blood rushing through my veins, and I knew that the blood sprinklers were going to use my blood in their ritual. Suddenly, the strange device sprang to life. The blades began to spin, and the tank of blood started to empty. The blood sprinklers chanted louder, their voices rising in a crescendo of terror. I closed my eyes and prayed for a miracle. As the last drop of blood was drained from the tank, the blood sprinklers fell silent. The air around me seemed to crackle with energy, and I could feel the presence of something otherworldly. A deep, guttural voice echoed through the basement, and I knew that the blood demon had been summoned. The blood demon was a creature of pure malevolence, a being of darkness and destruction. It was a towering figure with glowing red eyes and razor-sharp claws. The blood demon turned its attention to the blood sprinklers, and they cowered in fear. It raised its claws and began to slaughter them one by one, their screams echoing through the basement. I watched in horror as the blood demon tore through the blood sprinklers, its hunger for blood insatiable. I knew that I was next, and I prepared myself for the end. As the blood demon approached me, I felt a sudden surge of energy. I broke free from my bonds and ran for the stairs, my heart pounding in my chest. The blood demon gave chase, its claws tearing through the walls as it pursued me. I could hear its heavy footsteps behind me, and I knew that I had to find a way out of the house. I reached the front door and burst outside, the cold night air hitting me like a slap in the face. I ran as fast as I could, my legs burning with the effort. The blood demon emerged from the house, its eyes glowing with rage. It lunged at me, its claws tearing through my jacket. I stumbled and fell, my heart racing with fear. I knew that I was going to die, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. As the blood demon loomed over me, I heard a voice calling out from the darkness. It was Mr. Thompson, the town's mayor. He had heard the commotion and had come to investigate. He was armed with a shotgun, and he fired at the blood demon, the blast echoing through the night. The blood demon roared in pain and turned its attention to Mr. Thompson. It lunged at him, its claws tearing through his shirt. I struggled to my feet and grabbed a nearby branch. I swung it at the blood demon, hitting it in the back. The blood demon turned to face me, its eyes filled with rage. It lunged at me again, but I was ready for it. I swung the branch with all my strength, hitting it in the head. The blood demon stumbled and fell, its body twitching in the dirt. I could see that it was injured, but it wasn't dead. Mr. Thompson and I managed to escape the blood demon's wrath, but the town of Willow Creek was forever changed. The blood sprinklers had been defeated, but their legacy lived on in the memories of the townsfolk. I left Willow Creek a few days later, my heart heavy with the knowledge of what had happened. I knew that I would never forget the town or the people I had met there. As I drove away, I looked back at the town one last time. The sun was rising in the sky, casting a warm glow over the forest. I knew that the town would recover, that the people of Willow Creek would find a way to move on from their dark past. And as I drove away, I couldn't help but wonder if the blood demon was still out there, waiting for its next victim. I found myself trapped in a nightmarish game of cat and mouse. My stepmother, a malevolent figure shrouded in mystery, had pursued me with relentless determination, her icy blue eyes glinting with a sinister intent. It began on a stormy night, as thunder clapped like 1,000 tormented spirits, and lightning illuminated the house's grotesque gargoyles. I had retreated to the sanctuary of my bedroom, seeking solace from the raging tempest outside. But little did I know that a far more sinister storm was about to engulf me from within. As I lay trembling beneath the covers, a faint creak from the hallway sent shivers down my spine. The door creaked open slowly, as if beckoning me to a destiny I could not evade. A shadowy figure appeared in the dim light, its long, flowing hair obscuring its features. "Come, my sweet," my stepmother's voice purred, its honeyed tones dripping with venom. "We have much to discuss." Fear propelled me from the bed, my heart pounding in my chest like a captured bird. I stumbled backward, desperate to escape her icy gaze. But she was relentless, her footsteps echoing through the corridor, as she pursued me with unwavering determination. "You cannot hide from me forever, child," she hissed, her words slicing through the darkness like a razor blade. "I know all your secrets. I know the things you've done." I fumbled for the bathroom door, my fingers trembling as I frantically searched for a way out. But my stepmother's vice-like grip caught my arm, her iron fingers digging into my flesh. "Let me go!" I screamed, my voice filled with terror. "What do you want from me?" She laughed, a shrill, mirthless sound that sent shivers down my spine. "Oh, my dear Isabella, I want everything from you. I want your youth, your beauty, your inheritance. And I will have it all." With a surge of desperation, I kicked at her with all my might, breaking free from her grasp. I stumbled into the bathroom, slamming the door behind me and frantically locking it. But my sanctuary was a false hope. I could hear her pounding on the door, her voice growling with rage. "Open up, you little wretch," she screamed. "I know you're in there." I huddled in the corner, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The bathroom window was too small and high to escape through. I was trapped like a rat in a cage. As the pounding on the door grew louder, I knew I had to find a way out. I frantically searched the bathroom, my eyes darting across every inch of space. Then, I spotted a small, dusty vent in the ceiling. With trembling hands, I scrambled onto the sink and hoisted myself into the vent. I crawled through the darkness, my body scraping against the rough metal. I could hear my stepmother's footsteps growing closer, her voice growing more desperate. "Where is she?" she shrieked. "She can't have gone far." I crawled blindly through the vent, my mind racing with fear. I had to find a way out before she found me. Suddenly, I felt a cool breeze on my face. The vent led to a small, dilapidated attic. I crawled out into the dusty room and quickly hid behind a pile of old boxes. I held my breath as I heard my stepmother's footsteps approaching. She searched the attic, her eyes darting around frantically. "She's here somewhere," she hissed. "I can smell her." Time seemed to stand still as I listened to her footsteps move further away. When the coast was clear, I cautiously made my way to the attic window and looked outside. The storm had passed, and the moon cast an eerie glow over the grounds below. I could see a small shed in the distance. It was my only chance to escape. I gathered my courage and jumped out of the window, landing softly on the ground below. I ran as fast as I could towards the shed, my heart pounding in my chest. As I reached the shed, I heard my stepmother's scream of fury. She had discovered my escape. I fumbled with the lock, desperate to get inside. Finally, the door swung open, and I fell into the darkness. I could hear my stepmother's footsteps closing in. I huddled in a corner, trembling with fear. Then, I heard a faint scratching sound. A small, furry creature scurried across the floor. I caught a glimpse of its green eyes gleaming in the moonlight. It was a black cat with a white patch on its chest. I had seen it before. It was my childhood pet, Whiskers. I thought I had lost him in the storm. Whiskers slowly approached me, his tail twitching nervously. He rubbed his head against my leg, as if offering me comfort. "PSSSD," I whispered. "Come here, Whiskers." Whiskers jumped into my lap and curled up, purring softly. I stroked his fur, finding solace in his warmth and companionship. Suddenly, I heard a noise outside the shed. My stepmother was still searching for me. I knew I had to get out of there. I glanced at Whiskers. "Can you help me, Whiskers?" I asked. Can you lead me out of here? Whiskers purred louder and jumped down from my lap. He walked to the door of the shed and scratched at it with his claws. I followed Whiskers as he led me through the darkness. We wound our way through the grounds, avoiding my stepmother's line of sight. Finally, we reached the edge of the property. Whiskers stopped and looked up at me, his green eyes glowing with a strange intelligence. Thank you, Whiskers, I said. You saved my life. Whiskers meowed softly and nuzzled my hand. Then, he turned and disappeared into the shadows. I made my way to the nearest town and sought refuge in a small inn. As I lay in bed that night, I couldn't help but wonder about Whiskers. How had he known to find me? And how had he been able to lead me to safety? I fell asleep with a sense of gratitude. Whiskers, my childhood pet, had not only saved my life but had also shown me that even in the darkest of times, there is always hope. The next morning, I returned to the manor to confront my stepmother. Armed with the knowledge that I had escaped her clutches, I faced her with newfound determination. You cannot control me anymore, I said. I will not let you ruin my life. My stepmother laughed, but her laughter was hollow and defeated. You cannot escape me, Isabella, she hissed. I am your stepmother. I am your guardian. You belong to me. No, I said firmly. I belong to myself. With a flick of her wrist, my stepmother hurled a crystal goblet at me. I ducked just in time, and the goblet shattered against the wall. You will regret this, Isabella, she said. You will pay for your defiance. I turned and walked away, leaving my stepmother alone in her rage. I had broken free from her clutches, and I would never look back. In the aftermath of that terrifying night, I rebuilt my life. I went to college, found a job, and started a family of my own. I never forgot Whiskers, the black cat who had saved my life. I named my daughter after him, and she grew up to be a strong and independent woman just like me. And so, I lived a full and happy life, haunted only by the occasional nightmares of that stormy night and the malevolent stepmother who had tried to destroy me. But I knew that I was stronger than her. I had survived her evil, and I would never let her win. It was a dark and stormy night, the kind of night that makes you want to curl up by the fireplace with a good book and a warm cup of tea. But I wasn't at home. I was on a business trip, staying at a quaint little bed and breakfast in the countryside. The inn was charming, with its creaky wooden floors and cozy fireplaces in every room. But on this particular night, the atmosphere was anything but comforting. I had just returned from a long day of meetings, and as I approached the inn, I noticed a strange figure standing in the doorway. It was an old woman, her hunched back and long, tangled hair illuminated by the dim light of the porch. She was staring intently at the door, as if waiting for someone or something to arrive. I hesitated for a moment, unsure if I should approach her or simply walk past. But curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to introduce myself. Hello, I said, trying to sound friendly and non-threatening. I'm staying here at the inn. My name is Alex. The old woman turned her head slowly, her eyes locking onto mine. She didn't respond, but instead continued to stare at me with an unsettling intensity. I felt a chill run down my spine, and I couldn't help but wonder what secrets this woman was hiding. Are you all right? I asked, trying to break the silence. Can I help you with something? The old woman's eyes narrowed, and she spoke in a raspy, barely audible voice. You can't help me, young man. But I can help you. I was taken aback by her cryptic response, but I decided to play along. Help me with what? The old woman's gaze shifted back to the door, and she whispered, with the truth. Before I could ask her what she meant, she turned and shuffled away, disappearing into the darkness. I stood there for a moment, feeling a mixture of confusion and unease. I shook off the strange encounter and headed inside, hoping to forget about the old woman and her cryptic words. But as the night wore on, I found myself unable to shake the feeling that something was off. The storm outside grew more intense, and the wind howled through the trees, making the old inn creak and groan. I tried to distract myself by reading a book, but I couldn't focus on the words on the page. my mind kept wandering back to the old woman and her mysterious warning. As I lay in bed, trying to fall asleep, I heard a soft knock on my door. I sat up, my heart racing, and called out, "Who's there?" There was no response, but the knocking continued, growing louder and more insistent. I got out of bed and cautiously approached the door, my hand trembling as I reached for the handle. As I opened the door, I was met with a gust of cold wind and a sudden downpour of rain. But there was no one there. I stepped outside, scanning the porch and the surrounding area, but I saw no sign of the old woman or anyone else. I returned to my room, feeling more unsettled than ever. I tried to convince myself that it was just the storm playing tricks on my mind, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The next morning, I awoke to the sound of birds chirping and the sun streaming through my window. I felt a sense of relief, thinking that the strange events of the previous night were nothing more than a bad dream. But as I made my way downstairs for breakfast, I noticed that the old woman was nowhere to be found. I asked the innkeeper about her, but he seemed confused by my question. "What old woman?" he asked, looking genuinely perplexed. I described the woman to him, but he shook his head and said, "I've never seen her before." "Are you sure you're not mistaken?" I was taken aback by his response, but I decided to let it go. Maybe I had imagined the whole thing, I thought. Maybe the stress of the business trip and the stormy night had caused my mind to play tricks on me. But as I went about my day, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still off. I felt as though I was being watched, and every time I turned a corner or entered a new room, I half expected to see the old woman lurking in the shadows. That evening, I decided to confront the old woman once and for all. I grabbed a flashlight and headed outside, determined to find her and get some answers. I searched the grounds of the inn, scanning every corner and crevice, but I couldn't find any trace of her. I was about to give up when I noticed a faint light coming from the old barn at the edge of the property. I approached the barn cautiously, my heart pounding in my chest. As I drew closer, I could hear the sound of muffled voices coming from inside. I hesitated for a moment, unsure if I should continue, but my curiosity got the better of me. I pushed open the door and stepped inside, my flashlight illuminating the dim interior. The barn was filled with old farming equipment and dusty hay bales, but there was no sign of the old woman or anyone else. As I turned to leave, I heard a soft whisper in my ear. "You're too late." I spun around, my flashlight revealing the old woman standing behind me. She was holding a small, leather-bound book, and her eyes were filled with a mixture of sadness and regret. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The old woman sighed and said, "I tried to warn you, but you didn't listen. Now it's too late." I was about to ask her what she meant when I heard a loud crash from upstairs. I turned and saw that the barn door had slammed shut, trapping us inside. The old woman's eyes widened in fear, and she said, "We have to get out of here. Now." We ran towards the door, but it was locked tight. I tried to force it open, but it wouldn't budge. I could hear the sound of footsteps approaching, and I knew that we were in serious danger. The old woman handed me the leather-bound book and said, "Take this. It's the only way to stop them." I took the book and opened it, my eyes scanning the pages filled with strange symbols and cryptic messages. I had no idea what it was, but I knew that I had to trust the old woman. As the footsteps grew louder, I felt a sudden surge of energy coursing through my body. I raised the book above my head and began to recite the words on the page, my voice growing louder and more confident with each passing moment. Suddenly, the barn was filled with a blinding light, and the footsteps stopped. I could hear the sound of voices screaming in pain, and I knew that we had won. When the light faded, I looked around and saw that the barn was empty. The old woman was gone, and there was no sign of the danger that had threatened us just moments before. I walked outside, feeling a mixture of relief and confusion. I had no idea what had just happened, or how I had managed to defeat whatever had been lurking in the shadows. As I made my way back to the inn, I couldn't help but wonder about the old woman and her mysterious book. I knew that I would never forget the strange events of that night, or the woman who had tried to warn me about the truth. In the days that followed, I tried to make sense of what had happened, but I couldn't find any answers. The old woman had disappeared, and the innkeeper had no memory of her ever being there. But as I packed my bags and prepared to leave, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had been given a glimpse into a world that most people would never see. And I knew that, in some small way, I had been changed by the experience. As I drove away from the inn, I looked back at the old building, its creaky wooden floors and cozy fireplaces now a distant memory. I knew that I would never forget the woman in the doorway, or the strange and terrifying events that had unfolded on that dark and stormy night. It was a bright, sunny day in the Florida Keys. The sky was a brilliant shade of blue, and the water was a clear, sparkling turquoise. My dad and I had decided to spend the day fishing, hoping to catch some of the famous Florida Keys fish. We had our anchor out and had been fishing for about an hour when suddenly, the boat got bumped, and we rocked a little bit. My dad, always the jokester, said, "Looks like Jaws is after us. Better stay away from the edges." We both laughed, but the laughter quickly turned to shock as the boat began moving backward. We were being towed by our anchor line that was in the water. Whatever had it was now dragging the boat backward, slowly getting faster, and our boat was getting pulled under too. My dad's eyes widened, and he muttered, "No F***king way," as he dropped his pole and ran from the front to the back of the boat. He grabbed a knife and cut the anchor line, freeing us from the unseen terror that was pulling us under. As the boat bobbed back to the surface, we both looked at each other, our hearts pounding in our chests. We knew we had just experienced something truly terrifying, and we couldn't help but wonder what could have been so powerful to drag our boat underwater like that. We decided to head back to shore, our minds filled with questions and fear. As we approached the dock, we noticed a group of people gathered around, pointing at something in the water. We cautiously approached, and as we got closer, we saw a massive, dark shape moving beneath the surface. It was a creature unlike anything we had ever seen before. The creature was at least 30 feet long, with a sleek, black body and razor-sharp teeth. Its eyes were a deep, piercing red, and it seemed to be staring directly at us. We could feel the fear and tension in the air as the crowd of onlookers whispered amongst themselves, trying to make sense of what they were seeing. As we stood there, frozen in fear, the creature suddenly lunged forward, its massive jaws snapping shut just inches from the dock. The crowd screamed in terror, and we knew we had to act fast. My dad quickly grabbed a nearby boat hook and tried to fend off the creature, but it was too powerful and too fast. The creature continued to circle the dock, its red eyes glowing menacingly in the sunlight. We could see the fear and panic in the eyes of the onlookers as they frantically tried to call for help. But there was no one around to assist us, and we knew we were on our own. My dad and I quickly devised a plan. We would use the boat to distract the creature while I grabbed a harpoon gun from the nearby tackle shop. We knew it was a risky move, but we had no other choice. As we prepared to make our move, the creature lunged forward once again, this time coming dangerously close to the boat. My dad managed to fend it off with the boat hook, but we knew it was only a matter of time before it would strike again. I quickly grabbed the harpoon gun and loaded it with the harpoon. My heart was pounding in my chest as I took aim at the creature. I could feel the adrenaline coursing through my veins as I prepared to take the shot. As the creature lunged forward once again, I fired the harpoon, hitting it directly in the side. The creature let out a deafening roar as it thrashed about in the water, trying to free itself from the harpoon. My dad and I watched in horror as the creature slowly began to sink beneath the surface, its massive body disappearing into the depths of the ocean. We knew we had just experienced something truly terrifying, and we couldn't help but wonder what could have been so powerful to cause such destruction. We spent the rest of the day trying to make sense of what had happened, but we knew that we would never forget the unseen terror of the Florida Keys. As we headed back to our hotel, we couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. We had survived the encounter, but we knew that we would never forget the fear and panic that we had experienced. We also knew that we would never look at the ocean the same way again. The next day, we decided to head back to the dock to see if there were any updates on the creature. As we approached, we noticed that the crowd had dispersed, and the dock was empty. We walked down to the water's edge and peered into the depths, hoping to catch a glimpse of the creature. But there was nothing there. The water was calm and still, as if nothing had ever happened. We stood there for a moment, trying to make sense of it all. Had we imagined the whole thing? Had the creature somehow disappeared without a trace? We knew that we would never have the answers to our questions, but we also knew that we had experienced something truly terrifying. We had faced our fears and come out the other side, and we knew that we would never forget the unseen terror of the Florida Keys. As we walked back to our hotel, we couldn't help but feel a sense of gratitude. We had survived the encounter, and we knew that we would never take our lives for granted again. We had faced our fears and come out the other side, and we knew that we would always remember the unseen terror of the Florida Keys.